The film begins with scenes of the main character Francesca, who is seen in shock after receiving bad news on the phone. It is revealed that the call came from the morgue house, requesting the identification of her husband's body, who died in a terrible car accident that night. Francesca's life begins to unravel that night. She goes to see the body, accompanied by her friend Cesare. While driving, she noticed her husband's car had crashed on the side of the highway. Her husband Maurizio's body was kept in a hospital morgue near the highway. Francesca realizes her life has fallen apart the moment she arrives at the hospital in her luxurious fur coat and sees her husband's dead body. She will no longer be the wealthy influence she once was. Francesca also considers what will happen to their infant daughter Giulia. In this harsh world, how will she and her baby girl survive? Francesca has had a bad feeling about her late husband's Fren since the funeral. Francesca was regarded as a beauty icon at the time. She was young and lovely. All of Maurizio's friends had evil intentions for her. All of her late husband's wealthy friends made her feel threatened. The next day, Francesca is seen in her traditional office attire, smoking a cigarette. Cesare, Francesca's friend and Maurizio's company's legal advisor, arrives in Francesca's office with more bad news for her. Cesare informs Francesca that Maurizio has left his company and Francesca is deeply in debt. Francesca will not receive the insurance money because he has not paid his insurance installments for the last few months. Francesca was grieving her husband's death, but she was also convinced that her husband had left her a large inheritance. Unfortunately, another bubble bursts, and Francesca is confronted with harsh reality. Cesare informs his friend Francesca that the bank will soon seize her house, farms, and all of her property because he, too, is bankrupt. Francesca only had a few days to mourn her husband's death before everything was taken away from her. In his will, Maurizio only left misery. Francesca has no choice but to return to her father because he was a lower middle-class man who could not afford to look for his daughter or bring up his granddaughter, Giulia. Despite his good intentions, Francesca's father did not have a single penny in his pocket when he came to visit Francesca after she became a widow, let alone raise her and her daughter. Francesca gives him the money he needs to buy train tickets and return to his hometown. Francesca expected nothing more than her father's best wishes. Francesca's mother-in-law, on the other hand, cuts ties with her after Maurizio dies and refuses to assist her financially. She physically distances herself from Francesca and shows no sympathy for Giulia, her granddaughter. She claims she does not have Giulia's child support. She has to fire her devoted housekeeper Rosaria, who has been handling her household duties for decades, because Francesca has very little left to live on in this world. Rosaria expresses gratitude and assures her that she will not abandon her in difficult times. She informs Francesca that she will not charge her any fees for the work she will be doing from now on. Francesca is relieved to see that someone is rooting for her during these trying times. Francesca decides to pay a visit to one of her wealthy friends, Cristina, and asks her to hire her for her clothing line. Cristina is surprised to see Francesca, a former VIP customer who is now desperate for a regular wage. Cristina accepts the terms and hires her as an employee. Francesca was not ashamed of becoming a low-wage worker from a wealthy woman. She was simply in desperate need of money to make a better living. Francesca's wealthy girlfriend notices her working in the shop one day. They find it very sad, but also disgraceful, and so they decide to cut ties with her. They didn't want their wealthy reputation tainted by friendship with a poor and needy woman. The next day, Maurizio's wealthy friend visits the cloth shop and tries to take her for granted. He believes the job is necessary for her and attempts to take advantage of her. But Francesca was not built for it. She was far too beautiful to be taken for granted. Besides, the job she was doing didn't pay enough to cover Maurizio's million-dollar debt. Francesca eventually quits her job. Francesca was in a dire financial situation and had no choice but to liquidate her husband's last asset, a yacht. Cesare eventually buys it from her for a very low price. This could have been a devastating blow to Francesca, but because she had no money in her account, even the small sum paid for the yacht seemed sufficient to her. Following the yacht, she sells all of her luxury furniture and paintings, as well as her expensive clothes and shoes, in order to raise funds to pay off her husband's debts. She pays off the majority of her debt with the proceeds from the auction of her personal belongings. Francesca had to find a solution for her daughter's good fortune now that she was free of Maurizio's debts. One day, her maid Rosaria approaches her and tells her not to worry because it doesn't take long for a woman this beautiful to remarry. After a few days, Francesca receives an invitation from a wealthy old man named Enrico. Enrico was one of Maurizio's associates, and he wanted to meet Francesca to mourn the loss of Maurizio's soul. Francesca agrees to meet with him because she believes Enrico will make a proposal. However, it turns out that Enrico is already married. He takes her on a nighttime luxury dinner date to a posh restaurant. Enrico offers to pay for all of her and her daughter's expenses for the rest of her life, but only if she agrees to let him exploit her whenever he visits her city. Enrico clarifies that he is only interested in one-night stands with her and that, as a politician, he cannot divorce his wife and marry Francesca. This has the potential to harm his image. Enrico wanted Francesca to be his call girl indirectly because she was 50 times hotter and more attractive than his wife, and the vacancy had become available after her husband died. To survive in the world, she says nothing and goes with the flow. Cesare then introduces Francesca to another wealthy and astute businessman a few days later. He gives Francesca a hideous fake necklace and reveals himself to be a penny pincher who promises to give her a real diamond necklace soon. She ends up throwing his fake necklace into his dentures and leaving the date in the middle of it. Francesca later pays a visit to a friend's home. She discovers a fur coat in her closet that is identical to one she once owned. It was Francesca's original fur coat. It turned out Carla, Francesca's friend, reveals that she had a woman buy the fur coat Francesca had put on to pay off her debts at the auction. Carla had the coat altered so that Francesca would not recognize it. Carla claims that she was unable to afford such an exclusive and expensive fur coat, so she hired a woman to bid on it for her. Francesca realizes that even her friends are betraying her and loses faith in everyone. Carla's husband, Sandro, shows up at Francesca's house one day. Francesca greets him in a luxurious silk robe. This makes Sandro fall even harder for her. Sandro can't keep it a secret any longer, so he admits his feelings for Francesca. When she sees Sandro confessing to her, she becomes sexually charged. Sandro tells her that if she lets him get inside her pants, he will worship her body. They end up turning each other on and having intercourse for the rest of the night. Just as Sandro begins to suspect that he is having an affair with his wife's friend, Francesca makes her first move by asking him to purchase a fur coat for her. When she specifies the details, it appears that she was requesting the exact coat that was once hers, but is now in the possession of Sandro's wife. Francesca threatens him with revealing his secret affair to his wife Carla if he does not get her the coat. Francesca had escaped the bubble and learned how to coexist with the hungry wolves. All she had to do was tease them a little with her body, and she'd get whatever she wanted in return. Anyway, Sandro is terrified by Francesca's threat and ends up purchasing an expensive fur coat and sending it to Francesca's house. She eventually sells it to a tailor for a handsome sum. She uses her coat money to pay off her daughter's school fees as well as 1 year's rent. And with the remainder, she purchases a cheap used car. Carla discovers that her husband purchased an expensive fur coat for Francesca on installments and is still paying the monthly installments. Carla acts out and goes to Francesca's house, where she fights with her over the coat and demands that she return it to her. She informs Carla that she has sold the coat and spent all of the proceeds. Carla becomes enraged and begins revealing her late husband's dark secrets as a result of this act. She informs her that Maurizio had an extramarital affair. Don't think you're his only attractive woman. He was having an affair with a girl who was even more beautiful and better than you. Everyone was aware of the secret affair but chose not to inform you. Carla dismisses Francesca's attitude with the news and departs. Francesca decides to meet the other woman who was dating Maurizio. She's curious about what Maurizio didn't notice about that girl. Francesca discovers that the woman, Camilla, was a lovely lady with a kind heart. Camilla admits she wanted Maurizio to abandon you and marry her instead. Maurizio, on the other hand, chose Francesca and his daughter over Camilla. Francesca leaves Camilla's place with a completely different attitude. She knew this woman came from an upper-class family, and no one in her family had ever seen her before Maurizio was born. She is aware of how much men in her society desire her. She was well aware that hungry predators would pay her anything for flashing her body. And she doesn't want to commit to one man because she wants every man's money. She does not want to be limited to one man. She eventually devises a master plan to steal as much money as possible from wealthy snobs. She organizes a lottery and invites 20 people to participate. Each participant must pay 100 million lira to enter the lottery contest, and the winner will receive Francesca as a prize. The reason for charging such a high price was to attract true lovers and admirers who would go to any length to obtain her. She also states that the identities of the 20 participants will be kept private. Whoever wins the lottery will have Francesca as his personal property for 4 years, with full rights to do whatever he wants with her. Francesca seeks Cesare's assistance with legal documentation and requests that he approach men from the elite society, ensuring that the men are eligible to pay the lottery ticket price and are desperate to sleep with her. The lottery news quickly spreads throughout the city. Francesca's mother-in-law arrives to hear the news and has an argument with her. She tells Francesca that exposing her body is disrespectful to her family. Francesca, whose heart had turned stone cold as a result of how society treated her, shuts down her mother-in-law and tells her she couldn't care less. Francesca also provides a harsh reality check, recalling the time she outcast her on Maurizio's death and refused to help her financially. She tells her mother-in-law to keep her head out of her business and continues on her way. Collecting 20 men willing to pay 100 million liras to sleep with a woman is an impossible task, but in Francesca's case, it was effortless. Her tickets sell out in a very short period of time. Francesca realizes at one point that she does not want the majority of the men who purchased the tickets to participate in the lottery. Francesca knew all of the men who bought the tickets. Serena's husband was one of the men she met. She realized her relationship with Serena would end on bad terms when she discovered her husband had purchased the ticket. Serena, she believes, will ignore her husband's thirst and come after her as the evil witch. Francesca was not expecting a girl to enter the lottery, but Maurizio's mistress Camilla is one of the 20 people who purchased tickets. Camilla tells Francesca she admires her beauty. Cesare seizes the opportunity and offers Francesca and Giulia lifetime support in exchange for her marriage. Francesca pretends she is unaware of Cesare's thirsty intentions, but she knows exactly what Cesare was looking for. Finally, Francesca hits a man named Antonio by accident with her car and falls in love with him. Despite the fact that Antonio is an ordinary man, Francesca sees a spark in him that distinguishes him from other men in society. Giulia, her child, bonds with Antonio as well. Francesca worries about Antonio finding out about the lottery, but she discovers that Antonio was a fraud who knew Francesca was going to win $20 million and purposely got hit by her car so he could make her fall in love with him. Francesca plays the man card after being duped by a man in the name of love. She disguises herself and informs the state police about an illegal lottery that promotes prostitution, as well as the location of Cesare's office. The police raid the area and discover heavy checks with the names of the participants. The names will be published in the news soon, according to the police. All of the participants were either politicians or wealthy businessmen whose reputations were about to be ruined. Francesca confesses to the police officer about the $20 million in checks, much to the chagrin of the participants. She informs him that the participants are her late husband's business associates and friends who have written checks to assist her financially. Francesca ends up saving their reputation and receiving all of the checks without becoming the property of any of the participants. The film ends with her living happily with Giulia and her maid Rosaria,